Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure and honor to join NASSCOM. I've admired the IT culture and the accomplishments of the IT industry for many, many years. It's also an honor to follow such distinguished executives and entrepreneurs. I heard many of the last few sessions. And so thank you for my screen and show some slides. I'm a clinician, so I'm going to speak from the perspective of a clinician, what I think India needs to do to become a global digital health leader. So I'm not an engineer, I'm not a software developer, so just take it from that perspective. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm told that if you click twice on the screen, you can see my slides on a full screen basis. So as was mentioned, I'm a professor at Duke. I'm also a physician. I see patients. But like many academics at Duke, I also do research. I do clinical trials. And one of my areas of interest is how can we develop digital products which have a very sound efficacy base? Because that is really one of the areas that I find is lacking. So here are some of my disclosures. As an academic, I have to disclose my outside relationships. But I think this slide,
Dr. Murali, we can't see your slides. I think once you click and you have to say share somewhere.
Yes, I did say share. Let me try. Thank you. Thank you for sharing my screen. And can you please advance? Can you go to the next slide? Thank you. Well, thank you. I think I'm going to sort of preach to the choir here when I say that, we're in the midst of three revolutions, the genomics revolution, the mobile health revolution, and also the big data AI revolution. So I don't need to tell anybody in the audience about these three areas, but I think what others have emphasized, and I agree fully, is that the pandemic really fast forward and accelerated the adoption of all three of these particular areas. And I think all three are areas where India, I believe, is uniquely sort of qualified to become a world leader. Of course, we have the talent. I think we're generating large amounts of data. And I think it's only a matter of how can we put these together to come up with the right solutions to the right problems. Can you have the next slide? So I'm going to give you some examples. This is obviously an example that is near and dear to everyone here. Computational genomics, about 2 years ago, was something that was nice to have. A lot of people were like, doing genetic testing on their dogs and seeing, if they can trace their ancestry to some Neanderthal, etc. But all of a sudden, with the pandemic, now computational genomics has become essential. So you can see on the left-hand slide how they used genomic mapping of mutations in the COVID virus to really track the spread of it. In the old days, you would track the spread of the virus by calling people, finding out where people have traveled. You don't need to do any of this. You just take samples, and based on the mutations, you can construct what's called as a phylogenetic tree and see where the virus has originated and where the virus is spreading to. So on average, the COVID-19 virus is mutating twice a month. So, and as you saw with the recent British mutation, and now there's South African mutations, there's all kinds of mutations. So that's one area of a huge success. Another area of success in genomics is obviously the speed at which we've been able to develop vaccines. Barely 12 months since we first sort of gave this particular pandemic a name, there are already 51 vaccines in development, of which 6 have emergency use authorization. So that's unprecedented speed at which we've been able to develop gene therapies. So just imagine if we could apply that to develop gene therapies for a variety of other diseases. If a patient comes into the emergency room with a rare condition, what if you could sequence them overnight? And then the next morning, before the person wakes up, you already know what the mutation is that the person has, and you have developed a custom drug to target that particular mutation. Now, this is not science fiction. It's already happened with some patients in the US where they have uncovered rare metabolic inborn errors of mutation overnight by doing whole genome sequencing in 24 hours. I have the next slide. Obviously, as the previous speakers have mentioned, the other big area of success in digital health is telemedicine. I think I heard someone mention that there's been a 400% acceleration in adoption. Of course, telemedicine is relatively easy because all you're doing is connectivity, right? You don't have to prove efficacy. You don't necessarily need to get a lot of complicated regulatory approvals for clinical trials. You don't need to do sort of placebo-controlled trials. You just need to set up some standards. And the government was actually proactive in issuing telemedicine standards some time ago. And I think they've launched 2 really pioneering programs. I think eSanjeevani, which I'm told has something like 5 lakh consultations across 100 different subspecialties, which is a success by any measure. And the government has also launched Kiran. I heard someone mention mental health, how mental health has come to the forefront, rightly so. So Kiran is, to my knowledge, the world's first national mental health rehabilitation hotline. There are many sort of nonprofit hotlines and private hotlines, but I'm not aware of any government that has set up a nationwide mental health hotline. On the private sector, I think we heard some examples. One of the examples I mentioned, is Apollo 24/7. Apollo already had a very robust telemedicine system that was operating in a number of that integrated it with their app, and they were able to do consults across something like 4,000 doctors, and to date, I think something like 2.5 lakh consultations, and they've filled something like 4 lakh prescriptions over the last 6 months or so. So that's a huge, huge, huge success. That kind of sort of rapid scale up and integration with their regular brick and mortars health system. Talking about vaccines, this is another success story. And again, many of you know of Fuya. It's a US-India sort of innovation. It's not a real vaccine. It's not an RNA vaccine, but this is the first of its kind digital vaccine. And Bhargav, who's the brains behind it, also really coined the term digital vaccine. We all know that obesity is a big risk factor for complications from COVID-19. And we know that many of the traits, the behavioral traits for obesity, start in childhood. So what if you could develop a digital vaccine to prevent NCDs, and NCDs in India having a big interaction with pandemics? So just this month, I think Fuya published a groundbreaking clinical trial in JMIR, a leading magazine, clinical trials journal, showing that this digital vaccine does change behavior. I also heard someone talk about mental health. I think outside of India, one of the big success stories in mental health is this text messaging service called Crisis Text Line, or CTL. CTL has allowed people to anonymously text any issues they have relating to their mental health, and then they have a machine learning system that triages their text messages based on the seriousness and based on how it analyzes the words. So for example, you're seeing here, if somebody texts saying every day, I put a gun to my head, you can see how the system automatically escalates it from a machine-based response to a trained, experienced therapist, and so on and so forth. So they've handled something like 50, 60 million text messages. And more important, they've actually put this entire data set out in the public for researchers to try to analyze and come up with new insights and to actually improve the system. So that kind of a public-private partnership, I think, is a very important model for Indian tech companies to put their data out. Academics and others improve on it, because I don't think a company by itself may have the bandwidth to really analyze all their in-house data. May I have the next slide? So the other huge success is the growth of sensors. I think this is one area where I believe India really can accelerate to the next level. So this is a Stanford researcher, Tejaswani, whose picture I'm showing you. She's actually a graduate from University of Mumbai in biotechnology, and then she went to Stanford as a postdoc. So this is a study they published in Nature Biomedical Engineering, showing that a smartwatch, signals from a smartwatch, can detect infection 3 to 4 days before you are aware of it. So 3 to 4 days before you have any symptoms, the smartwatch already can detect signals, and the two measures they used here are heart rate variability. At Duke and others have also done similar studies with common cold, with influenza, etc. So the smartwatch, with a combination of its sensors, whether it's sleep, whether it's heart rate variability, whether it's how much you move, these have deep information in it that can detect infection 2 to 3 days before someone has it. The accuracy level is now about 75–80%, and I think it can be improved easily to 90–95%. I actually got my dad one of these watches, and he's wearing it. So let's see how it does. So this is the kind of technology I think Indians are perfectly capable of developing. And I would love to see an Indian homegrown watch that has 4 or 5 common vital signs that can be measured, and then you validate it and use it monitoring. At the next. So COVID has not only shown us the successes, but has also revealed a lot of gaps. I believe the WHO and the Indian government both have put in place, policies to try to address some of these gaps. So some of this is redundant. I think we've been very, very reactive. We are lucky that it took us 100 years from the last pandemic to this one, but that we may not be so lucky the next time. The next big pandemic may come in 1 year or 2 years, so we need to be prepared for that. In terms of data, as everybody here is familiar, there are multiple data silos. There's very, very little integration of data, and we also need to create a pipeline of data and data sharing across different entities and researchers that does not yet exist. Our health sort of electronic medical system is pretty much interoperability is at 0. I would say at this point, all of the incentives are aligned to not sharing. In fact, the business model in healthcare is let's not share our data. I think we need to find ways to break that and find ways that your data can reside with the patient and the patient can share it with anyone they want at the click of a button. But the main area that is of interest to me that I'm going to focus on is the slide at the bottom, which is efficacy. There's a huge efficacy gap. If you look at on the App Store, there are hundreds of thousands of apps that all make claims. They may not make overt claims. They try to use scientific language. But if you dig deep down, the publications they cite have nothing to do with that. They've done a clinical trial. They don't have any efficacy. A high school student can post an app and claim to sort of treat depression or anxiety or sleep. And you get like 100,000 5-star reviews and everyone thinks it works, but it doesn't work. I think we need to create a culture of doing efficacy trials, randomized clinical trials, and publishing in high-quality medical journals. The Chinese have now done that. The Chinese are now publishing in some of the top journals in the world, and I believe that Indians can do it, and I think we should, because it's easy to bypass the efficacy step, but we should not do that, because ultimately, you're talking about medicine. You're not talking about building a widget for playing a video game. If you give a wrong hotline number, or if you give a wrong sort of treatment to somebody with depression, that could result in suicide. So I think the consequences can be very severe. Can I have the next slide? So I think ultimately, we need to create an ecosystem. I read somewhere that India is at number 48 and is the #1 in the innovation sort of the World Innovation Index amongst Asian countries. So that is, I think, not excluding China, Southeast Asian countries. So that is, I think, a big 5–6 years. I think we can do better. I think we can go all the way to #1 in telemedicine, as somebody said. And I think in digital health, we can easily become the top 5. And I think that should be our aim. And so what are the solutions? I'm showing the slide on the right side. In India, when you grow up, you sort of bifurcate people into or an engineer. And then you're thinking of taking the IIT exam or the medical school exam. I think that whole culture needs to change. Just like we learn two languages when we're a child, I think we need to find ways to create hybrid models of people who know both medicine and engineering. We need to become friends. We need to cultivate medical engineering innovation right from a very young age. And then more important, engineers are very entrepreneurial, but doctors are not. In fact, doctors are taught that you need to be safe, you need to be cautious. You should not break things. Whereas in engineering, you know, you build fast and break things. How can we teach doctors to be innovative? So I think these are some of the examples. So I was a judge at MIT Hacking Medicine. So 50% of medical school students at Harvard, Stanford are thinking about startups. How can we create that culture amongst medical students in India? And I think that is something that NASSCOM can take upon itself, because you start young. That's the generation we want to build, this mindset of innovating. I can build the next big things. How can you identify problems and find a way to solve problems rather than just being respectful and saying, you know, so we change that mindset. I have the next slide, I believe is the last. So I just want to end with these two quotes by two people that I admire a lot. You know, Dr. Devi Shetty is a doctor. So, you know, his prediction is the largest healthcare provider in the future will be a software device. And I agree with him. And I hope that software device is built in India. I think it could be. And then, you know, of course, Narayana Murthy said progress is often equal to the difference between mind and mindset. So yes, we need to have an exponential mindset, but let's not forget efficacy. You know, you're taking care of serious patients. Let's keep the patient in mind. Let's keep the doctor in mind. You want to make sure you build something that fits into the workflow right from the start. Don't ignore the doctor. If you do, it's at your own peril. So I just want to thank everybody for inviting me, and I'm sorry for the slight glitches that we started. And I want to wish everyone happy Pongal.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Murali. Each and every statement is so profound, and I'm definitely going to keep in my personal library, especially this, and many messages for the Indian health tech entrepreneurship and healthcare providers. And I'm sure your views on RCT is something very critical, especially from the R&D side. And your message about bringing the engineers and doctors, biomedical engineering. And if you look at every engineering college is setting up an innovation center, but we don't see the same in a medical college. And in fact, the clinical trials as a topic is something which they actually hit on once they join in a medical institute in India, especially. But with having a lot of data generated out of, I always say, if data is oil, healthcare data is a rocket fuel. So with that kind of a gold mine or a rocket fuel with us, and bringing in some of these new initiatives into the marketplace, especially in India, I'm sure India can definitely play a major role in the world healthcare delivery. And thank you so much for being with us on this closing keynote. And it's very, very profound. And we look forward to be interacting with you. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and honor to be here.